She was 9 months pregnant, standing in the rain, with nothing but a bag and a broken heart, and she texted the most dangerous man in Seoul by mistake. He didn't delete the message. He sent a car. What happened next will make you question everything you thought you knew about fate, about love, and about the kind of man who shows up when the one who promised forever walks away. This is the story of Faith. A woman who lost everything in one night, and found something she never saw coming. Stay with me, because this story does not go where you think it's going. Welcome to Afro-K Romance Fairy Tale. On today's episode, you get a dose of betrayal, power, romance, love, unexpected encounters, and a beautiful beginning. If this is your first time here, make sure to like, subscribe, click the notification icon to get a reminder when new amazing stories drop, and send this story to friends and family who you think would love to watch it. And also tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd really love to know. Now let's dive back into this amazing story. Her name was Faith Adeyemi, and she was the kind of woman people turned to look at twice, not just because of how she looked, though that was reason enough. She was tall, deeply beautiful, with skin the color of warm mahogany and eyes that held both laughter and depth in the same glance. She carried herself with the natural grace of a woman who had been raised to know her worth, even when the world was doing its best to make her forget it. She had given up everything for love. She left Lagos at 25, left her mother's cooking and her sister's laughter and the red dust roads she had grown up on. She crossed oceans for a man who told her she was his forever. His name was Tae Park. He was from Gwangju, South Korea, charming and polished and full of promises that sounded, at the time, like the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. For 3 years she believed him. Then one night, Tae came home smelling like perfume that was not hers. It was not the first time. But something about that particular night, the way he didn't even try to explain it, the way he set his keys on the counter with the ease of a man who had already made a decision, told Faith that this was different. This was not a mistake being hidden. This was an ending being delivered. She was 9 months pregnant when he told her name was Yuna. He said it simply, flatly. Like a man reading from a script, he had rehearsed until the emotion drained out of it. He said it had started 3 months ago. He said he hadn't planned it. He said he was sorry, but that he couldn't keep pretending. And while he spoke, Faith stood perfectly still with one hand pressed against her belly and the other curled at her side. And she listened to every single word with the dignity of a woman who had decided she would not give him the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. She reminded him of everything. Every sacrifice. Every compromise. Every morning she had woken up in a country that was not hers and built a life from scratch with nothing but love as her foundation. She reminded him of his child, growing inside her body at that very moment, listening to the sound of a father choosing someone else. Tae said nothing. He walked to the bedroom and came back with a bag. Her bag. Already packed. Already zipped. He had folded her clothes while she slept. He had planned this with the cold efficiency of a man who had stopped feeling guilty somewhere between the decision and the execution. Faith picked up the bag herself. She walked to the front door. She stopped. She did not turn around when she spoke her last words to him in that apartment. She told him, quietly and with absolute certainty, that God would judge him for this night. Not her. But then she walked out into the rain. She made it to the front steps of the building before her legs gave out. She sat on the wet concrete in the dark, rain soaking through her dress, through her hair, across her skin, and she pressed both hands to her belly and she wept. Not loudly. Faith had never been a loud griever. She wept the way deep water moves, quietly and with enormous force. She spoke to her baby. She said it's okay. She said Mama's here. She said we're going to be all right. Then she reached for her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely see the screen. She found Chisholm's name, her best friend, her lifeline, and she typed everything. That he had thrown her out. That she was in the rain. That she was scared. That she had nobody. That she didn't know what to do. She hit send. She waited. What Faith did not know, what she could not have known with tears blurring her vision and fear running through her like a current, was that the message had not gone to Chisholm. She had scrolled one contact too far. The message had gone somewhere else entirely. To someone she had never met. To someone the rest of Seoul was afraid of. Min Juniseo did not do feelings. He had decided this early, sometime before he was 20, when he watched sentiment cost the people around him everything and concluded that the only safe place to keep your heart was behind a wall thick enough that nothing and no one could reach it. By 34 he had built that wall into an empire. He was the youngest boss the John crime family had ever elevated, feared across every underground district in Seoul. The kind of man whose name, spoken in certain rooms, made other men straighten their posture without realizing they were doing it. He was standing at the window of his penthouse when the message came. 40 floors above Seoul, whiskey in hand, white shirt open at the collar, watching the city the way a man watches something he owns. Which was accurate. The rain was heavy tonight, blurring the lights below into something almost soft. Is did not notice the softness. He was thinking about the Busan meeting, about the Incheon situation, about the 17 things that required his attention before morning. His phone buzzed. He picked it up without urgency, expecting his right-hand man Director Kong with an update. He read the message. Then he read it again. Then a third time, slowly, the way you read something when you're trying to find the angle, the agenda, the reason it exists. But there was no angle. There was no agenda. There was only a woman's voice coming through a screen, raw and unguarded and completely unaware of who she was talking to, saying the most honest thing Junsa had read in years. Please, have nobody. I don't know what to do. He typed back asking who it was. The reply came fast. An apology, a correction, a retreat. Wrong number, so sorry, please ignore, sorry for disturbing you. The grammar of someone trying to disappear, to take up less space, to undo the vulnerability of having been seen. So set the phone down. Picked up his whiskey. Set it back down without drinking. Picked up the phone. He asked where she was. He did not think about why. The question left his fingers before his mind had fully formed it, which was something that had not happened to Juniso in a very long time. He was a man who thought before every movement, every word, every breath that could be interpreted as intention. And yet there it was. 3 words already sent, already delivered, already waiting for an answer. The answer came after a long pause. Outside an apartment building in Mapo-gu. But please don't worry. I'll figure something out. Hurry. The particular tone of someone drowning politely. Junsa was already reaching for his jacket. Director Kong materialized from the shadows of the penthouse the way he always did. Attentive, quiet, permanently braced for the unexpected. Junsa told him to bring the car around. Kong mentioned the Busan call. Junsa told him to make Chairman Yoon wait. Kong opened his mouth one more time and then closed it, because there was an expression that lived on Juniso's face in moments like these. Not anger, not urgency, just a particular quality of stillness that communicated, without words and without room for negotiation, that the conversation was over. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor. Junso stepped out into the rain. He found her exactly where she said she was, sitting on the front steps of a luxury apartment building in the dark, soaked through. Her bag half over her head in a gesture so helpless and so human that something moved in Juniso's chest before he could stop it. She was beautiful in a way that landed like a surprise. The kind of beauty that doesn't announce itself but simply exists, fully and quietly, and asks nothing from you except that you notice it. Even in this state. Even in the rain. Even with her eyes red and her hands shaking and 9 months of pregnancy making every movement deliberate. She startled when his driver approached with the umbrella. Junso had already sent a message. The man with the umbrella works for me, you are safe, come. And he watched from the car as she read it, as she looked at the vehicle, as she made the calculation that only a woman with absolutely no remaining options makes. She took the umbrella. She got in the car. And Junicio, who had not made an impulsive decision in 14 years, looked at this stranger in his back seat. Wet, frightened, magnificent, and felt something he had no name for settle into the space behind his sternum like it had always been there and had simply been waiting for tonight to make itself known. He did not speak on the drive. Neither did she. But somewhere in the 20 minutes between Mapo-gu and his building, the silence between two strangers shifted into something that was not quite comfortable but was no longer entirely the silence of strangers either. Faith looked out the window at the rain-blurred city and Juniso looked straight ahead, and both of them were thinking things they would not have admitted to anyone, least of all each other. The penthouse doors opened. Faith stepped out of the elevator and stopped. 40 floors of glass and silence and city light. The kind of space that exists so far above ordinary life it has its own atmosphere. She stood in the entrance with her soaked dress and her overnight bag and her enormous belly, and she looked at all of it and then at him. This tall, still, unreasonably composed man who had sent a car for a stranger in the rain without explanation, and she had absolutely no idea what to say. He looked at her for one long moment. Then he said she was wet. He said it the way a doctor states a diagnosis. Factual, focused, without sentiment. He said that was the current problem and everything else could wait. He turned to Mrs. O, the small, warm woman who ran his household with grandmother's tenderness and military precision, and gave quiet instructions. Within minutes Faith was in a guest room larger than any apartment she had rented in her life, wrapped in dry clothes, with a bowl of warm mayakguk on the nightstand and extra blankets at the foot of the bed. She sat on the edge of that bed and looked around at all of it. Then she looked down at her belly. She placed both hands there, the way she always did when she needed to remember that she was not alone, and she told her baby quietly that she didn't know where they were, but that it was warm and dry, and that tonight that was enough. Down the hall, Jose sat at his desk and took the Busan call. He was precise and efficient and correct in all the ways his empire required. But twice during that call, just twice, just briefly, his eyes moved to the closed door at the end of the corridor. He looked away both times before anyone could notice. He told himself it meant nothing. He had been lying to himself about smaller things for years. This one, he suspected, was going to be harder to maintain. 10 days passed. And in those 10 days, the penthouse that had always been a place Junissa merely occupied began, quietly, stubbornly, without his permission, to feel like somewhere people actually lived. Started with small things. A Nigerian cookbook open on the kitchen counter. The smell of pepper soup moving through rooms that had only ever known the sterile absence of a man who ate because his body required it. A soft yellow baby blanket folded over the arm of the couch that Mrs. O had purchased without being asked, already certain of how this was going to go long before either of the two people involved had figured it out. Faith moved through the space with a grace that undid him slowly. She was not meek about it. She was not performatively grateful in the way people sometimes are when they feel they owe something. She was simply herself, fully and unapologetically, and that self happened to be one of the most compelling things Junesio had encountered in his entire adult life. She laughed with Mrs. O in a way that filled rooms. She spoke Korean with a Nigerian warmth that transformed the language into something he had never heard it be before. She pressed both hands to her belly when she was thinking, this unconscious, constant gesture of connection with her unborn child, and every single time Junsa saw it, something tightened in his chest that he was running out of ways to explain away. He came home early 4 times in 10 days. He sat at the kitchen counter when he didn't have to. He ate everything she cooked without once saying it was extraordinary, because saying so would have required him to acknowledge that he had noticed, and noticing would have required him to admit something he was not yet prepared to admit. Faith watched him from across the counter with a quiet smile she believed was invisible. It was not invisible. But neither of them said anything, because some things, when they are new and fragile and entirely unexpected, survive better in silence than they do in words. What neither of them knew, what was unfolding 7 miles away in an apartment that still smelled like Faith's cooking even though she was gone, was that Tay Park's world was quietly, completely falling apart. He had been happy for exactly 7 days. 7 days of Yuna filling the space with laughter and ease, of believing he had made the right choice, of telling himself that this lightness, this freedom from the weight of a marriage he had outgrown, was what he had deserved all along. Yuna was beautiful and attentive and asked exactly the right questions in exactly the right tone. She asked about the business accounts. She asked whose name the properties were registered in. She asked about the digital banking passwords with the casual curiosity of a woman making conversation. Tay told her everything. Because Tay was a man who had never believed a beautiful woman could be a strategy. On the 8th morning he woke up and opened his banking app. 0. He refreshed it. 0. Business accounts swept clean. Investment portfolio liquidated. Property holdings. Transfer requests filed and approved with his own digital signature, which Yuna had memorized watching him type it across 7 days of deliberate, patient observation. The apartment lease had a cancellation notice filed by an authorized signatory. Her side of the closet was empty. Her phone was disconnected. She was gone, completely surgically without a single word, and she had taken everything with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had done this before, who had chosen him specifically, who had executed the plan without hesitation and without remorse. Tay sat on the floor of his empty apartment. The same floor where Faith had stood 9 months pregnant, holding a packed bag she hadn't packed herself, on the night he had looked at his wife and chosen wrong. He sat there for a long time. Outside, Seoul moved forward without him. It always did. The city had no patience for the consequences of other people's choices. You made your bed in this city and then you lay in it. And the traffic kept moving and the lights kept changing and the world did not pause to accommodate your regret. He found out where Faith was through a thread of mutual contacts pulled until it gave him an address. He showed up outside Jana's building looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 days. Unshaven, hollow, expensive clothes hanging off him like they belonged to someone else. He never made it past the lobby. Security stopped him at the door. A message arrived on his phone from an unknown number. One sentence. She doesn't want to see you. Leave. He looked up at the building. 40 floors of glass and light, impenetrable and indifferent. Somewhere up there he understood someone was watching. Someone who had decided that the door Tay Park had closed on his pregnant wife in the rain was a door that would not be opened again. Not by guilt, not by tears, not by the hollow architecture of too late apologies. He left. He came back the next day. And the day after. Each time the same result. Each time the same message. Each time the growing, humiliating comprehension that the life he had discarded was now protected by a force he could not negotiate with, and could not intimidate and could not reach. Back in the penthouse, Faith knew none of this. Junso had handled it the way he handled everything. Quietly, efficiently, completely. And had not mentioned it because she was 9 months pregnant and carrying enough weight already and he was not in the business of adding to it. He told himself this was practical, logical. The management of an unnecessary variable that would only cause distress. He did not examine it beyond that. But Mrs. O, who saw everything and said only what was necessary, watched her employer handle this situation with a care that had nothing to do with practicality, and she smiled to herself in the kitchen over her soup pot. And she said nothing, because Mrs. O was a wise woman who understood that the most important things always revealed themselves in their own time. That time was coming. Faster than either of them expected. It was on a Thursday evening, 10 days after Faith arrived, 4 days before her due date, that the ache in her lower back announced itself in a way she could no longer explain away. She had been telling herself all day that it was nothing. She was good at telling herself things were nothing. She had spent 3 years telling herself her marriage was fine. But this was her body speaking a language older than thought. And by the time Mrs. O brought her evening tea and found her breathing through contractions 8 minutes apart, the truth had become undeniable. Mrs. O set the tea down. She sat beside Faith. She placed one hand gently on her back and asked, in her soft Korean, how long it had been. Faith said since morning. Mrs. O stood up immediately. And in that moment, in the quiet pivot from evening tea to something enormous, the 10 days of small domestic warmth and careful distance and unspoken things came rushing toward a single point, the way all rivers eventually find the sea, whether or not the water was ready for the journey. Now pause right here for a second. 'Cause I need to know something from you. If you were Faith, 9 months pregnant, thrown out by your husband, taken in by a stranger who turns out to be the most powerful and dangerous man in Seoul, would you stay? Would you trust it? Or would the fear of being hurt again be louder than everything else? Drop your answer in the comments right now. And tell me, are you Team Faith or Team Juniseo? Because this story is about to go somewhere that is going to make that question very complicated. Don't go anywhere. Junseo was ending his final call of the evening when Mrs. O appeared in the doorway of the study. In 9 years she had interrupted him during a call exactly twice. Both times it had been genuinely urgent. He read her face in 1 second, that particular combination of calm and alert that meant right now, and ended the call without ceremony or apology to the man on the other end. She told him Faith was in labor. Something happened to Juniseo in that moment that he would spend a long time afterward refusing to examine directly. It was not panic. Juncio did not panic. It was something quieter and more structural than panic, like the feeling of a foundation shifting beneath a building that has stood undisturbed for years, registering a tremor it was not built to expect. He stood. He asked how far apart the contractions were. He told Director Kong to bring the car and call ahead to Yonsei Severance Hospital for a private suite. Then he walked to the guest room door and knocked, which he had never done before in this apartment, had never needed to, had never thought to, and pushed it open. Faith was standing beside the bed. She had already changed into the clothes she had packed herself. Practical, soft, prepared, and her hospital bag sat at her feet. She had done all of this alone, quietly, without asking for help, which was so entirely her that it made something ache in his chest. A contraction moved through her as he crossed the room. He watched it move across her face, the way her breath went deliberate and controlled, the way her hand found the bedpost and gripped it, the way she rode the wave with a focus and a strength that most people never find even when they go looking for it. He crossed the room without thinking. He put his hand over hers on the bedpost and held it there and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say, and Junus had never been a man who filled silence with noise when silence was more honest. The contraction passed. Faith exhaled slowly. She looked down at his hand over hers. Then she looked up at his face. And in that moment, standing in the guest room of a penthouse that was not hers, in a city that had broken her, on the night her daughter was deciding to arrive, Faith felt something move through her that was entirely separate from the labor. Something warm and terrifying and real. Something she was absolutely not ready to name. She told him she supposed they should go. He picked up her hospital bag without a word. She did not tell him he didn't have to. Junsa sat in the hospital corridor for 6 hours and did not move. He had not planned to stay. He had driven her here, ensured everything was arranged, and the logical next step was to return to the penthouse and the Incheon matter and the ordinary function of his empire. He told himself this with some force. Then he sat down in one of the corridor chairs and his body simply declined to execute the instruction. Director Kong appeared with 2 cups of vending machine coffee and the expression of a man who had made peace, long ago, with not understanding everything his employer did. He handed Junseo a cup. They sat in the fluorescent quiet and said nothing for a long time. Eventually Kong mentioned that the Incheon matter could wait until morning. Junseo said nothing. Kong took that as agreement. Inside the suite, Faith was doing the hardest thing she had ever done. She held Mrs. O's hand through contractions that came closer and harder and longer, and she breathed the way her body demanded she breathe, and somewhere in the middle of it all she asked for her phone and she called Lagos. Her mother answered on the second ring, and Faith, who had been strong through the packing of her bag and the rain on the steps and the wrong number and the 10 days of navigating the impossible tenderness of a man who didn't know how to show tenderness, Faith said Mama in a voice that finally, completely broke. Her mother held her through the phone the way only mothers can, across oceans and time zones and every impossible mile between them, and she prayed in Yoruba and English and told her daughter that the women in their family had always been strong. She said this baby was coming into the world surrounded by generations of women who had survived harder things and had done it with grace. She said Faith could do this. He said, "I love you." Faith said, "I love you too." And then she put the phone down and she pushed and she breathed and she pushed again, and at 2:17 in the morning a sound came into the world that was small and outraged and absolutely, completely alive. In the corridor Junseo heard it. He had been sitting with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the floor, suspended in the particular stillness of a man who is waiting for something without fully admitting that he is waiting for anything. And then it came, through the closed door, past the fluorescent hum of the corridor lights, past every wall he had ever built, that cry. Furious. Perfect. Junseo looked up. What happened to him in that moment was not something he had language for. It moved through him from somewhere beneath his chest. Not warmth, not softness, nothing as simple as those things. More like the sensation of something vast and permanent rearranging itself inside him without asking permission and without any interest in his objections. He stood up. He stood in that hospital corridor, and behind that door a baby was crying. A baby that was not his, that had nothing to do with him, that he had no claim to and no established place in the life of, and he could not explain, even to himself in the most private architecture of his own mind, why every protective instinct he had ever possessed suddenly and completely reorganized itself around that sound. He sat back down. He put his face in his hands. Director Kong, who had woken at the first cry, looked at his employer for a long and very careful moment. Then he looked away. Some things a loyal man pretends not to see. Not because they are shameful, but because they are sacred. The nurse came out 20 minutes later. She told Junicio that mother and baby were both healthy. A girl. 3.4 kilograms. Strong lungs. She said this with professional satisfaction, as though she personally deserved credit for it. He thanked her. His voice was completely even. She asked if he would like to come in. He should have said no. There was no reason to go in. He was not family. He was not a friend in any conventional sense of the word. He was a man who had received a wrong number text on a rainy night and made one decision he still could not fully account for, and every subsequent decision had simply followed from that one like dominoes arranged by something larger than choice. He followed the nurse inside. Faith was propped against the pillows with her hair loose around her shoulders and her eyes heavy with exhaustion and something else, something luminous and demolished and brand new, and in her arms was the smallest and most complete human being Junicio had ever seen in his life. The baby had Faith's nose, a full head of dark hair, and her eyes, when they opened briefly as Junicio came to stand at the foot of the bed, were the deep, unfocused onyx of all newborns, looking at the world without yet knowing what they were seeing, trusting it anyway. Faith looked up. She was too tired for anything but honesty, and honestly she was glad he was there. She didn't examine that. She simply held it. She told him she had decided to name her Soyeon. Korean name. A Nigerian heart. A child of two worlds who would be claimed by both. Junicio looked at the baby for a long time. Then he said it was a good name. And Faith smiled. The real kind, the completely unguarded kind, the kind that had nothing behind it except the pure uncalculated truth of what she felt. And Junicio looked at that smile and understood, with the resignation of a man who has dealt in reality his entire life and knows it when he is standing inside it, that he was finished pretending this was temporary. The baby reached with one small fist, the way newborns do. Random, instinctive, without intention, and it pointed loosely and approximately in his direction. Jill looked at that small fist. Then he pulled the chair from beside the bed and sat down. Nobody said anything. Outside the window the city was beginning, almost imperceptibly, to lighten toward dawn. Something that had been approaching for weeks had finally, quietly, arrived. 3 days later, Faith came home. She came home. That was the word she used without planning to, standing in the elevator with Soyeon against her chest, and she let it sit there after it left her. Turned it over, felt its weight, decided she was too tired and too full of something she couldn't name yet to argue with herself about whether it was accurate. The penthouse had changed again. There was a bassinet in the guest room, white and solid and exactly right, that had not existed when she left for the hospital. Soft lights had been installed at floor level along the corridor for nighttime walking, so she wouldn't have to flood the hallway with harsh light during the 2 a.m. feeds. The kitchen counter held a week's worth of groceries selected specifically, Mrs. O informed her with barely contained pride, to support breastfeeding. Faith stood in the guest room doorway and looked at the bassinet for a long time. She asked Mrs. O quietly who had arranged all of this. Mrs. O smiled and went to make tea, which was her standard response to questions with obvious answers. That evening Junicio came home to find Faith on the couch with Soyeon sleeping on her chest. The baby's small back rose and fell with the reliable perfection of brand new life. The apartment was warm and quiet and smelled faintly of the jollof rice Mrs. O had attempted under Faith's instruction before leaving for the evening. Not quite right but close enough to make Faith laugh when she tasted it, and that laugh had stayed in the room somehow, the way good sounds do. Joe set his jacket down. He looked at them both on the couch. This woman and this child who had arrived in his life through a wrong number and a rainy night and some chain of events that he could trace practically but could not explain in any way that satisfied him. And he stood there for a moment longer than he needed to before going to the kitchen. He served 2 plates. He brought them to the coffee table. He sat in the armchair adjacent to the couch and began to eat and told Faith without looking at her that she needed to eat. They sat in the quiet that had become, over weeks, their quiet. Not the silence of strangers maintaining distance but the silence of 2 people who had stopped performing composure for each other, and discovered that what existed underneath it was something neither of them had been expecting and neither of them quite knew what to do with. Jian slept between heartbeats. At some point Faith's eyes grew heavy. She tipped her head back against the cushions and drifted into that shallow warm space between waking and sleep, and the arm holding Seoyeon relaxed slightly, the baby tilting gently with her loosening grip. Junso was across the room before he decided to move. He lifted Seoyeon from Faith's arms with a carefulness that would have been unrecognizable to every man in Seoul who feared him. Both hands, deliberate, tender, one large palm spanning the baby's entire back, and he held her against his chest and stood in the middle of his own penthouse in the low evening light and looked down at her. Seoyeon blinked her unfocused eyes in his direction. She made her small sound. Not a cry. More like a question. More like, I see you. Who are you? Are you going to stay? Jill looked at her for a long time. And the man who had built an empire on the absolute refusal of softness stood there and felt himself come completely, irreversibly undone by 7 pounds of brand new human being who had done nothing except exist and look at him like he was something worth looking at. He sat back down in the armchair. He kept holding her. He did not put her down. Tay came on a Tuesday. Faith was returning from her afternoon walk with Mrs. O. Slow and careful, Seoyeon strapped against her chest in the soft carrier, the baby asleep and warm and entirely unbothered by the world, when she saw him standing outside the building. He looked destroyed. That was the only word for it. The expensive suit was the same, but everything inside it was different. Smaller somehow, like the confidence had been removed and nothing had been put in its place. His eyes, when they found hers, carried the weight of a man who had been alone with what he had done for long enough that he could no longer soften it. Faith stopped walking. She looked at him. She waited. He came apart on the pavement in front of her. He told her about Yuna. The accounts, the properties, all of it gone in a single night by a woman who had chosen him the way a surgeon chooses an instrument, deliberately and without attachment. He said he had nothing. He said he was sorry. He said it so many times the words stopped meaning anything. He talked about their marriage. He looked at Seoyeon against Faith's chest and something real and broken moved across his face. Genuine grief. Perhaps the most genuine thing about the entire moment, and he promised her everything he had promised before. Faith listened to all of it. She stood in the Seoul afternoon with her daughter sleeping against her heartbeat, and she listened to this man who had packed her bag while she slept and sent her into the rain 9 months pregnant, and she searched herself honestly. For anger, for longing, for the ghost of what she had once felt, and she found nothing. Not hatred. Not love. Not even bitterness. Just the clean, quiet emptiness that comes after something has burned completely through and left the ground clear. She told him she was sorry for what Yuna had done. She meant it. She was not a woman built for cruelty, and she took no pleasure in his devastation. But she told him clearly, without performance, without anger, with the simple directness of a woman who had nothing left to prove to anyone, that what he had lost with Yuna was money. What he had lost with her had no replacement. She told him to go home. The lobby doors opened behind her. Junseo stepped out. He wasn't looking for drama. He had simply come down at the right moment, or the moment had arranged itself the way significant moments sometimes do, without asking permission from the people inside them. He looked up from his phone. He took in the scene in a single glance. Faith, Tay, the baby, the history written in the air between them, and he walked to Faith's side and he stood there. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He simply stood beside her, still, present, absolute, and the message required no translation in any language that has ever existed. This woman is not alone. This woman has never been alone since the night she sat on those steps. And the person standing between her and whatever comes next is not moving. Tay looked at Junso. He looked at Faith. He looked at Seoyeon, sleeping peacefully, entirely unaware, already so completely belonging to a life that had quietly closed its doors to him. He looked at the ground. Then he turned and walked away. And neither Faith nor Junso watched him go. When the street was clear, Junso asked her quietly if she was all right. She turned the question over honestly, the way she had learned to do things since the night she had stopped lying to herself about her marriage, and she told him yes, that she actually was. He nodded once. He held the door open. She walked inside. He followed. That evening the sun set over Seoul in long amber ribbons, and Faith sat on the couch with her shoes off and Seoyeon in the bassinet beside her, the baby's chest rising and falling in that perfect newborn rhythm that makes the rest of the world feel temporarily manageable. Junsa sat at the other end of the couch with a document in his hands. He had stopped reading 30 minutes ago. The silence between them was theirs now. Fully and completely theirs. Faith asked him eventually, without looking at him, her eyes on the city burning gold through the glass, why he had really sent the car that night. The night of the rain. The wrong number. The beginning of everything. The question settled into the room like something that had been waiting a long time to be asked. Junsa was quiet for long enough that the city outside seemed to hold its breath with him. Then he said, in the even unhurried way he said everything that he didn't know. Faith nodded slowly. She told him she didn't know either. But she was glad. The word landed between them simply and without drama, and Junsa looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he had been carefully not looking at her for weeks, and something in his expression shifted. Not much, just enough. The way a door shifts when the lock has been turned from the inside. Seo Yun stirred in the bassinet. Junsa rose before Faith could and lifted the baby with both hands. Careful, practiced, natural in a way that still surprised her every time, and stood at the window with Seo Yun against his chest and the whole blazing city behind him. And Faith watched this man who was supposed to be the most dangerous person in Seoul hold her daughter like she was the most important thing he had ever been trusted with. 'Cause she was. And he knew it. And Faith knew that he knew it. And in the quiet of the penthouse 40 floors above the city that had broken her and then, without asking, begun to rebuild her, Faith Adeyemi felt something she had almost forgotten the texture of settle into her chest and stay there. Oh, not the fragile, desperate kind she had carried into that marriage. Something different. Something that had been tested by rain and betrayal and a wrong number and 6 weeks of slow, undeniable, terrifying truth. Something that felt, finally, completely, for the first time in longer than she could remember, like it was going to last. Some people enter your life through the wrong door and change everything behind the right one. Faith lost a husband who never deserved her and found something in the wreckage that no one could have predicted. A man who sent a car for a stranger in the rain, and somewhere between that night and this one forgot how to let go. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Junicio was always capable of this kind of love? Or did Faith unlock something in him that no one else ever could? And if you were Faith, after everything Tay put you through, would you have been brave enough to let someone new in? Or would the fear have been too loud? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If this story moved you, and I hope it did, please like this video, subscribe to Afro-K Romance Fairy Tale, and share this with someone who needs a story that reminds them that the wrong number might just be the right beginning. I'll see you in the next one.